Dear listeners, this is the final third part of this detective novel. The previous two parts are available on our channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Chapter 5. Just by chance, Maigret was joined by young Lapointe. They were both standing in the crowd, on the embankment side, not opposite the dead boy's house, but the house next door, because there were so many onlookers that they hadn't been able to find a better vantage point. There were cars, including many chauffeur-driven limousines, all along the embankments, from Pont Louis-Philippe to Pont Sully, and others were parked on the other side of the island, on Quai de Béthune and Quai d'Orléans. It was a cool morning, chilly, one might have said, very bright, very cheerful, pastel-colored. They saw the cars stopping in front of the big, black-draped gate, and people going inside and upstairs where they would bow in front of the coffin before reappearing and waiting outside for the convoy to form. A red-haired photographer, bare-headed, walked back and forth, pointing his lens at the rows of onlookers. He was not universally well received, and some people had no qualms about expressing their feelings to him. Nonetheless, he carried on imperturbably with his work. The public, particularly the ones who complained, would probably have been surprised to learn that he didn't belong to a newspaper, an agency, or a magazine, but that he was there on Maigret's orders. Maigret had gone to the laboratory at the police judiciaire early that morning, and with Moyes had chosen Van Hamme, the best and, most importantly, the most resourceful of the available photographers. I would like photographs of all the onlookers, first of all opposite the dead boy's house, then opposite the church, when the coffin is brought there, then when it comes out, and finally at the cemetery. Once the photographs have been developed, study them under the magnifying glass. It's possible that one person or several people will appear in all three places. They're the ones who interest me. Make enlargements without the people around them. In spite of himself, Maigret looked around for a light-colored raincoat with a belt and a dark hat. There was little chance of the murderer still wearing the same clothes, because the morning papers had given a description of them. The two cases, the one in Rue Popincourt and the burglary, were by now definitely seen as closely connected. There was much talk of the role of the police judiciaire and the previous day's interrogations, and the photographs of the four arrested men had been published. In one of the papers, below the portrait of Desmarlais the sailor, in a raincoat and a brown hat, it said, "Is this the murderer?" The crowd was a mixture. First of all, near the house, there were those who had gone to pay their last respects to the dead boy, and who were waiting to take their place in the cortege. Along the pavement, it was particularly the residents of the island and the concierges and shopkeepers of Rue Saint-Louis-en-l'Île. Such a nice boy, and so shy. When he came into the shop, he always raised his hat. If only he had cut his hair a bit shorter. His parents should have told him. Elegant people like that. It made him look like a bad sort. Maigret and Lapointe exchanged a glance from time to time, and an absurd idea came into the former's mind. How eagerly Antoine Bathilde would have slipped around this crowd with his microphone if he had been alive. Although, if he had been alive, there would have been no crowd. The hearse appeared and pulled up at the curb, followed by 3 more cars. Were they going to drive to the church of Saint-Louis-en-l'Île, which was 200 meters away? The people from the funeral directors first of all took down the wreaths and bouquets. It wasn't only the hearse that was covered with them. Flowers were also piled up in the 3 cars. Among the people waiting there was a third category, standing in small groups, the staff of Mylène Perfumes. Many of the girls and young women were pretty, dressed with an elegance which, in the morning sun, had a somewhat aggressive quality. There was a movement in the crowd, like a current passing from one end of the rows to the other, and the coffin appeared, carried by 6 men. Once it had been slid into the hearse, the family appeared. At its head, Gérard Bathilde was flanked by his wife and daughter. His features were very drawn, his complexion muddy. He didn't look at anyone, but seemed surprised to discover so many flowers. It was as if he wasn't fully present, as if he barely realized what was happening around him. Madame Bathilde showed greater composure, although she sometimes dabbed her eyes through the thin black veil that covered her face. Minou, the sister, whom Maigret was seeing in black for the first time, seemed taller and thinner, and she was the only one who paid attention to what was going on around her. Other photographers, these ones press cameramen, took some photographs. Aunts, uncles, and more or less distant relatives followed, and also, in all likelihood, the senior staff of the perfume and beauty products company. The hearse moved off, the cars full of flowers, and the family took their place behind it. Then the friends, students, teachers, and finally the local shopkeepers. Some of the onlookers headed towards Pont Marie or Pont Sully to go back to their jobs, but others set off towards the church. Maigret and Lapointe were among them. They followed the procession along the pavement, and on Rue Saint-Louis-en-Lille they found another crowd that hadn't been at Quai d'Anjou. The church was already more than half full. From the street they could hear the deep murmur of a pipe organ, and the coffin was carried to the bier, which was only partly covered by flowers. A lot of people had stayed outside. The doors hadn't been closed again, and the absolution was already underway when the sun and the cool air entered the church. Pater Noster! The priest, who was very old, walked around the bier waving his sprinkler and then swung the censer. Et ne nos inducas in tentationem. Amen. Outside, Van Hammer was still working. Which cemetery? Lapointe asked under his breath, leaning over Maigret's shoulder. Montparnasse. The Batilles have a family vault there. Are we going? I don't think so. Luckily, a lot of police officers had come to control the traffic. The immediate family took their seats in a car at the front. The more distant relations followed. Then came Batilles' colleagues and friends who ran to find their cars and tried to edge their way in. Van Hammer had taken the precaution of getting a lift in a little black police car that was waiting at a strategic point and picked him up at the last moment. The crowd gradually dispersed. Some groups were still conversing on the pavements. We can go back, Maigret sighed. They crossed the pedestrian bridge behind Notre Dame and stopped in a bar on the corner of Boulevard du Palais. What will you have? A white wine, a Vouvray, because the word Vouvray was written in chalk on the mirrors. Me too. 2 Vouvrays. It was nearly midday when Van Hammer stepped into Maigret's office with some photographs. I haven't finished, but there was something I wanted to show you straight away. 3 of us have been studying the photographs with a strong magnifying glass. I was immediately struck by this. The first photograph on Quai d'Anjou showed only part of the body and the face, because a woman was pushing from the side trying to slip into the front row. The man was incontestably wearing a lightweight beige raincoat and a dark hat. He was quite young, about 30. His face was ordinary, and he seemed to be frowning as if displeased by something around him. Here's a slightly better photograph. The same face, enlarged. The mouth was quite thick, almost sulky, and the expression was that of a shy person. This is still Quai d'Anjou. We'll see if he's in the photographs taken in front of the church that we're developing right now. I brought these down to you because of the raincoat. Weren't there any other raincoats? Several, but only 3 with belts. 1 middle-aged man with a beard, and a man in his 40s without a hat, smoking a pipe. Bring down anything else you find after lunch. Basically, the raincoat didn't mean very much. If Batilles' murderer had read the morning papers, he knew that they had published his description. Why then wear the same outfit as he had in the evening in Rue Popincourt? Because it was the only one he had. Out of defiance. Maigret had lunch at the Brasserie Dauphine again, just with Lapointe this time, because Janvier and Lucas weren't in the building. At 2:30, Maigret received a phone call that relaxed him. It was as if a large part of his worries evaporated all at once. Hello, Detective Chief Inspector Maigret. I'm putting you through to Monsieur Fremier, our senior editor. Please stay on the line. Hello, Maigret? The 2 men had known each other for a long time. Fremier was the editor of one of the biggest morning newspapers. I'm just asking if your investigation is making any progress. I'm taking the liberty of calling you because we've just received quite a curious message. And it came by express telegram, which is quite rare for an anonymous communication. I'm listening. You know that we published the photograph of the members of the Jouy-en-Josas gang this morning. Below the picture of the sailor, my editor insisted on printing the words, "Is this the murderer?" I saw. This cutting that has just reached us has just one word written in green ink, in large letters. No. Maigret's face brightened. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to send one of my men to fetch the message. Do you know which post office it was sent from? Rue de Faubourg Montmartre. May I ask you, Inspector, not to mention this to any other journalists? I can't publish this document until tomorrow morning. It's already been photographed, and the print will be ready shortly. Unless you ask us to keep it secret. Number on the contrary. I'd even like you to comment on it. One moment. The best thing would be to suggest that it's a joke, stressing that the real murderer wouldn't risk compromising himself like that. I think I understand. Thank you, Fremier. I'll send someone to you straight away. He went into the inspector's office, sent one of them to the Champs-Élysées, and asked Lapointe to follow him into his office. You look quite perky, Chief. Not really, not really. There's still a chance that I may be mistaken. He told Lapointe the story of the photograph cut from the newspaper and the no written in green ink. I'm even quite pleased about this green ink. Why? Because the person who struck 7 times in 2 rounds, if one might put it like that, under lashing rain, while a couple was walking along the pavement and a woman was looking through the window, isn't entirely a man like any other. I've often noticed that people who use green ink or red ink feel a profound need to distinguish themselves. For them, it's only one way of doing it. Do you mean that he's a madman? I wouldn't go that far. A lot of people would say an oddball. They exist on various levels. Van Hammer stepped into the office, carrying a thick bundle of photographs, some of which were still wet. Have you found the man in the raincoat anywhere else? Only 3 people apart from family and close friends appear in all 3 places. Quai d'Anjou, outside the church, and finally not far from the vault, in Montparnasse Cemetery. Show me. First of all, there's this woman. A young woman of about 25 with a dramatic facial expression. She looked uneasy, tormented. She wore a badly cut black coat, and her hair fell untidily on either side of her face. You told me only to pay attention to the men, but I thought... I understand. Maigret looked at her intensely, as if to penetrate her secret. She looked like a working-class girl who paid little attention to her outward appearance. Why was she as upset as the members of the family? More upset than Minou, for example. Minou had told him that her brother had probably never slept with a woman. Was she sure of that? Might she have been mistaken? And wasn't it possible that Antoine had a girlfriend? In the state of mind revealed by his pursuit of human voices in the most working-class districts, might not a girl like that have been the kind to interest him? In a moment, Lapointe, when we have finished, go back to Ile Saint-Louis. I don't know why, but I can see her as a salesgirl in a grocer's shop, or a dairy, what do I know? Perhaps a waitress in a cafe or a restaurant. The second individual, Van Hammer announced, showing the enlarged photograph of a man in his 50s. Had his clothes been slightly untidier, he might have been taken for a tramp. He looked straight ahead, with a resigned appearance, and one wondered why the funeral was interesting to him. It was hard to imagine him stabbing a young man 7 times and then running off. The murderer hadn't come to the area in a car. That was more or less certain. It was more likely that he had taken the metro at Voltaire Station, very close to the place where the crime had been committed. The metro clerk had only confused memories because 6 or 7 people had arrived at the station entrance in the space of 1 or 2 minutes. He had been punching tickets without looking up. It was mechanical. If I were to look at everyone who came through, my head would be spinning. Faces and more faces, almost all of them grumpy. Why had this shabbily dressed man stayed in front of the house, and then in front of the church, and why had he gone to Montparnasse Cemetery after that? What about the third one? Maigret asked. You know him. He's the one I showed you this morning. You'll notice that he doesn't hide. He must have noticed that I was at all 3 places. Here, in the avenue at the cemetery, he's looking at me curiously, as if wondering why I was photographing the crowd and not the coffin or the family. It's true. He doesn't look worried or preoccupied. Leave these photographs with me. I'm going to look at them in my own time. Thanks, Van Hammer. Tell Mose I'm very happy with the work you've done. In that case, Lapointe asked, once he was on his own with Maigret, Shall I go to the Ile Saint-Louis and show people the photograph of the girl? It'll probably turn out to be pointless, but it's worth a try. Check if Janvier is back. Janvier quickly stepped into the office and glanced curiously at the pile of photographs. There you are, Janvier. I'd like you to go to the Sorbonne. I think it'll be easy for you to go to the office and find out what courses Antoine Batil attended most assiduously. So I'm to question his fellow students? Exactly. He may not have had any real friends, but he must sometimes have chatted to other students. Here, first of all, is a photograph showing a girl who seemed to be upset at the funeral this morning, and who followed the coffin all the way to the cemetery. Someone might have met him with her. Maybe they've just heard of her. I get it. This one shows a man in a raincoat who was at Quai d'Anjou, then opposite the church, and finally at Montparnasse Cemetery. Show them that one too, just in case. I hope there's a class this afternoon and you'll be able to wait for them coming out. You don't want me to question the professor? I don't think they get to know their students, but hang on. Here's another photograph. It may have nothing to do with the case, but we mustn't neglect anything. A quarter of an hour later, MAIGRET was brought the newspaper cutting with the word "No" added in green ink. The word had been written in block letters almost 2 centimeters high and underlined with a firm stroke. The exclamation mark was a good centimeter longer. It looked like a vehement protest. Whoever had written those characters must have been indignant at the idea that a pathetic character like the former sailor could have been taken for the Rue Popincourt murderer. MAIGRET sat motionless over the newspaper cutting and the photographs for more than a quarter of an hour, drawing gently on his pipe, after which almost automatically he picked up the phone. Hello? Fremier? I was worried you might have left. Thanks for the document, which seems really interesting. At first I thought of putting a small advertisement in tomorrow's morning paper, but it's possible that he doesn't read classifieds. There's bound to be another article on the case. Our reporters are studying previous burglaries. I have a number of them working within a radius of 50 kilometers of Paris, showing the photographs of the gangsters to all the neighbors in the villas they have visited. Could you publish the following lines below the article or articles? Detective Chief Inspector MAIGRET would like to know what the sender of this message to the newspaper bases his claim upon. He asks him, if he has interesting information, to be so kind as to contact him either by letter or by telephone. I understand. Could you repeat it so that I'm sure of every word? MAIGRET repeated patiently. Fine. Not only will I publish this announcement on the first page, I'll put it in a frame. You must realize that you're going to be receiving letters or phone calls from lunatics. MAIGRET smiled. I'm used to it. You are too. The police and newspaper offices. Right. You'll be so good as to keep me informed. And the inspector immersed himself in the evening newspapers which had just been brought to him, groaning every time he found a new inaccuracy. There was an average of one, or at the very least an exaggeration, per paragraph, and the art thieves were becoming one of the most mysterious and best organized in Paris. Last headline, "When will the mastermind be arrested?" It was like the television news. He had sent the article and the photograph of the sailor with the "No" in green letters to the anthropometry department for any fingerprints that they might be able to take from it. The reply came quickly. A thumb on the photograph, and a very good image of the index finger on the back of the paper. They don't correspond to any prints on file. That meant, obviously, that Antoine Batil's murderer had never been arrested, and, more to the point, that he had never been convicted. MAIGRET wasn't surprised, and he was about to resume reading his papers when Lapointe came rushing in, very excited. A lucky break, Chief, and you were right. Crossing the footbridge, I noticed that I've run out of cigarettes. I go to Rue Saint-Louis-en-l'Île. I go into the cafe on the corner, and who do I see? The girl whose photograph I gave you? Exactly. She's a waitress. Black dress and white apron. There was a table of people playing cards. The butcher, the grocer, the landlord, and a man with his back to me. I got my cigarettes and went and sat down. When she asked me what I wanted to drink, I ordered a coffee, and she went behind the counter to make me an espresso. What time do you close in the evening? She looked at me with surprise. It depends on the evening. I finish at 7 because I open up in the morning. She gave me my change and went off without paying me any more attention, I preferred not to talk to her in front of the landlord. I said to myself that you'd rather do it yourself. You're right. She seems constantly about to burst into tears. She comes and goes as if she's in a daze and her nose is red. Janvier didn't get back to headquarters until 6 o'clock. There was a sociology class, and apparently he never missed that one. I waited in the courtyard. I saw the students at their desks, and once the class was finished, they hurried into the open air. I questioned 1, 2, 3, without success. Antoine Batil? The one who's in the papers? I see, yes, but we didn't spend time together. If you could find a person called Harteau. The third student to be questioned had looked around and suddenly called out, turning towards a young man who was walking away. Harteau! Harteau! It's for you! And to Janvier, I've got to go. I have a train to catch. Others were leaving on motorbikes and scooters. You want to talk to me? Asked a tall young man with a pale face and light grey eyes. I gather you were Antoine Batil's friend. Friend is too strong a word. He didn't make friends easily. Let's say that I was a classmate, and we occasionally chatted in the courtyard and sometimes went for a drink together. I only went to his place once and I didn't feel comfortable. I should say that I'm the son of a concierge on Place d'Enfer Rochereau. I'm not ashamed of it. At his place I didn't know where to put myself. Were you at the funeral this morning? Only at the church. After that I had an important class. Do you know if your classmate had any enemies? I'm sure he didn't. Was he popular? He wasn't popular either. Nobody paid him any attention, and he minded his own business too. What about you? What did you think of him? He was a decent guy. He was a lot more sensitive than he wanted to let on. I think he was too sensitive, and he tended to close himself away. Did he talk to you about his tape recorder? I think he even asked me to come with him one day. He was wild about it. He claimed that people's voices were more revealing than their picture as it appeared in photographs. I remember one thing he said. There are lots of picture hunters. I'm not yet aware of any sound hunters. He hoped to be given one of those miniature tape recorders made in Japan for Christmas, the ones you can hold in the palm of your hand. They don't yet have them in France, but apparently they're waiting for them. He would only have known them from magazine articles. Janvier hadn't neglected to ask Harteau if Batil had any girlfriends. No girlfriends, no, at any rate not that I knew of. It wasn't his style, and he was shy and reserved, but he'd been in love for a few weeks. He couldn't help talking to me about it. He had to confide in somebody, and his sister used to make fun of him, claiming that he was the girl and she was the boy of the house. I didn't see the girl, but she works on Ile Saint-Louis, and he saw her at 8 o'clock every morning. That was the time when she was alone in the cafe. The landlord was still asleep, and the landlady was doing the housework on the first floor. They were constantly interrupted by customers, but they did still manage to have some time to themselves. Was it really serious? I think so. What were his intentions? From what point of view? How did he see his future, for example? He planned to take classes in anthropology next year. His dream was to be appointed professor in Asia, in Africa, in South America, one after the other, so that he could study the different human races. He wanted to prove that they were all essentially the same, that differences would vanish as living conditions balanced out on all latitudes. Did he plan to marry? He wasn't yet talking about that. It's too recent. In any case, he didn't want to marry a girl from the same social class as himself. Was he rebelling against his parents, against his family? It wasn't even that. I remember he said to me one day, "When I go back home, I feel as if I'm in 1900. Thank you. Sorry for taking up your time." And Janvier concluded, "What do you say, Chief? What if that girl has a brother? What if they went further than young Harteau thinks? What if the brother got it into his head that the son of Mylène Perfumes would never marry his sister? You see what I'm getting at? You're starting to sound a bit 19th century, Janvier, old man. These things still happen, don't they? Haven't you read the statistics? So-called crimes of passion have declined by over half, and will soon seem like a quaint anachronism. In fact, Lapointe has found her, and she does work on Ile Saint-Louis. I'll try and have a chat with her tonight." What should I do now? Nothing, anything, everyday tasks. We'll wait. At 6:15, Maigret was having an early evening drink at the Brasserie Dauphine, where he met up with two of his colleagues. At the office, they sometimes spent whole weeks without seeing each other, each one confined in his own department. The Brasserie Dauphine was the neutral terrain where everyone finally met up. So, that murder in Rue Popincourt, are you starting to work for Rue des Saussets now? At 6:50, Maigret took a stroll along Rue Saint-Louis-en-l'Île and could see the girl in the café, serving the customers. The landlady was at the till, the landlord was serving at the bar. It was the brief flurry of early evening aperitifs. At 7:05, the girl went through a door and came back out a few moments later in the coat that she was wearing in the photograph. She said a few words to the landlady and left. She made straight for Quai d'Anjou without looking around, and Maigret had to quicken his pace to catch up with her. "Excuse me, mademoiselle." She misunderstood and started to run. "I'm Detective Chief Inspector Maigret. I'd like to talk to you about Antoine." She stopped dead and looked at him with an anxious expression. "What did you say?" "But I wanted to talk to you about—" "I heard you, but I don't understand. I don't—" "There's no point denying it. Who told you?" "Your photograph, or rather your photographs. You were outside the dead boy's house this morning, with a handkerchief clenched in your fingers. You were there when the funeral service started and when it ended, and then you were at the cemetery. Why was my photograph taken?" "If you would take a moment and walk with me, I'll explain. We're looking for Antoine Batille's murderer. We don't have any serious trails, no useful clues. In the hope that this murderer would be attracted by the funeral of his victim, I had photographs taken of the rows of onlookers. Then the photographer looked to see who could be found at Quai d'Anjou, outside the church and at the cemetery." She bit her lips. They walked quite naturally along the embankment and passed in front of the building where the Batilles lived. The black drapes with their silver tassels had disappeared. The windows were lit on every floor. The house had resumed its usual rhythm of life. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to tell me everything you know about Antoine. You were the person closest to him." She blushed suddenly. "What makes you say that?" "He said it in a different way. He had a classmate at the Sorbonne. The concierge's son." "Yes. He was the only one. He didn't feel at ease with the others. He always had a sense of being different. Well, he gave this fellow Harteau to understand that one day he was going to marry you." "Are you sure he said that?" "Didn't he say it to you?" "Number I wouldn't have accepted. We were from different worlds." "Perhaps he wasn't from any world except his own. Besides, his parents. How long had you known him?" "Since I've been working at the café. That's 4 months. It was in the winter, I remember. It snowed the first day I saw him. He was buying a pack of guitans. He came in to get a pack every day." "How long was it before he waited for you when you were leaving work?" "Over a month." "Did you become his girlfriend?" "Just a week ago today." "Do you have a brother?" "I've got 2. One in the army in Germany, the other works in Lyon." "Are you from Lyon?" "My father was from Lyon. Now that he's dead, the family has dispersed and I'm alone in Paris with my mother. We live on Rue Saint-Paul. I worked in a big store, but I couldn't cope. It was too tiring for me. When I found out that they were looking for a waitress in Rue Saint-Louis-en-l'Île—" "Did Antoine have any enemies?" "Why would he have had enemies?" "Because he liked taking his tape recorder round some very seedy places. Nobody paid him any attention. He sat in a corner or leaned on the bar. He took me with him twice." "Did you meet up every evening?" "He came to get me from the bar and brought me home. Once or twice a week we went to the cinema." "Can you tell me what your name is?" "Morissette." "Morissette what?" "Morissette Gallois." They had slowly turned back, crossed Pont Marie, and were now in Rue Saint-Paul. "This is my place. Is there anything more you want to ask me?" "Not for now. Thank you, Morissette. Good luck." Maigret sighed, and by Saint-Paul metro station, he took a taxi that brought him home in a few minutes. He tried not to think about his investigation, and after turning on the television out of habit, He turned it off again for fear that it might be talking about Rue Popincourt and the art thieves again. What are you thinking about? That we could go to the cinema, and that it's almost mild this evening. We'll be able to walk all the way to the Grands Boulevards. It was one of his favorite pastimes. After a few steps, Madame Maigret took his arm, and they walked along slowly, stopping from time to time to look at a window display. They talked about nothing in particular, a passing face, a dress, the last letter from his sister-in-law. That evening, Maigret fancied a Western, and they had to go all the way to Port Saint-Denis to find one. In the interval, he had a glass of Calvados, and his wife settled for a verbena tea. At midnight, the lights went out in their apartment. It hadn't occurred to Maigret that the previous day had been the first day of spring. It had turned up right on time. He saw again the light on Quai d'Anjou in the morning, outside the dead boy's house. At 9 o'clock he had a phone call from Poiret, the examining magistrate. Any news, Maigret? Nothing so far. At any rate, nothing precise. You don't think that sailor... What's his name again? Yvon de Marle. I'm convinced that while he's up to his neck in the art theft case, he has nothing to do with the murder in Rue Popincourt. Do you have an idea? It may be taking shape. It's still too vague to talk about, but I expect certain developments quite soon. A crime of passion? I don't think so. Financially motivated? He hated these classifications. I don't know yet. He wouldn't have to wait long to find out. The phone rang half an hour later. It was the desk editor at one of the evening papers. Inspector Maigret? This is Jean Roland. I'm not disturbing you. Don't worry. I'm not calling you for information, although if you have any, it would always be welcome. Maigret was rather chilly with the editor of that newspaper, precisely because he complained about not always being told important news items before anybody else. We print as much as 3 other newspapers. It would be natural. It wasn't war between them, more a sort of sulk. That was probably why the desk editor called him rather than his boss. Did you read our articles yesterday? I've skimmed them. We've tried to analyze the possibility of a close relationship between the 2 cases. In the end, we've found as many clues for as against. I know. And yet this article brought us a letter which we found in the morning mail that I'm going to read to you. Just one moment. Is the address written in block letters? Yes, the letter too. I imagine it's on ordinary paper of the kind that they sell in packs of 6 in tobacconists and grocers. Right again. Have you had another letter? Number go on. I'll read it. Dear Sir, I have read with care the articles published over the last few days in your estimable newspaper about what is called the Rue Popincourt affair and the affair of the paintings. Your editor is attempting unsuccessfully to establish a connection between the 2 affairs. I find it naive on the part of the press to imagine that young Batil was attacked on Rue Popincourt because of a tape. And in any case, did the murderer take his tape recorder away? As to the sailor de Marle, he has never killed anyone with his Swedish knife. Those knives are sold in every good ironmongery, and I have one myself. Except that mine really did kill Antoine Batil. I'm not boasting, believe me. I'm not proud of it. On the contrary. But I'm weary of all this fuss. And most importantly, I don't want an innocent man like de Marle to pay in my place. You may publish this letter if you see fit. I guarantee that it is only the truth. Thank you. Yours faithfully. Of course, there was no signature. Do you think it's a joke, Inspector? Number. Is it serious? I'm sure it is. Obviously, I could be wrong, but there is a strong likelihood that this letter was written by the murderer. Look at the envelope and tell me where it was posted. Boulevard Saint-Michel. You can take a photograph of it if you plan to publish a facsimile, but I'd like it to pass through as few hands as possible. Do you hope to find prints? I'm nearly certain that we'll find them. Were there any on the newspaper cutting on which someone wrote the word no in green ink? Yes. I read your appeal. Do you hope that the murderer will call you? If he's the kind of man I think he is, he will. I suppose there's no point in asking you what kind of man he is. For now, in fact, I'm obliged to keep quiet. I'll send you someone to pick up that letter, and I'll give it back to you once the case is over. Fine. Good luck. He turned back towards the door in surprise. Joseph, the old clerk, was standing in the doorway, and behind him there was a man in a beige uniform with big brown stripes on his trousers. His cap was beige too, and had a badge with a gold crown. This gentleman is insisting on giving you a small package in person, and I haven't been able to get rid of him. What is it? Maigret asked the intruder. It's a message from Monsieur l'Herbier. The leather merchant? Yes. Are you expecting a reply? I wasn't told, but I was asked to hand this package to you in person. It was Monsieur l'Herbier himself who gave me the task yesterday evening. Maigret had unwrapped a beige cardboard box, marked with the inevitable crown, and in the box he found a black crocodile skin wallet, the four corners reinforced with gold. Here again, the crown was in gold. A visiting card read only, "A token of my gratitude." Maigret put the wallet back in the box. "Just one moment," he said to the messenger. "You'll probably be better than me at rewrapping this package." The man looked at him in surprise. "You don't like it? Tell your boss that I'm not in the habit of receiving gifts. Add if you wish that I am still touched by his gesture. Aren't you going to write to him? Number." The telephone rang insistently. "Right. Carry on rewrapping your package in the waiting room. I'm very busy." And once he was on his own again, he picked up the phone. Chapter 6. "It's someone who doesn't want to give his name, Inspector. Shall I put him through anyway? He claims you know who he is." "Put him through?" Yep, he heard the click and said in a voice that wasn't entirely his usual one, "Hello." Maigret and his interlocutor were equally impressed, and the inspector was careful to avoid anything that might startle the person on the other end. "Do you know who's speaking?" "Yes." "Do you know my name?" "Your name isn't important. Aren't you going to try and find out where I'm calling from?" The voice was hesitant. The man lacked confidence and was trying to embolden himself. "Number." "Why?" "Because I'm not interested." "Don't you believe me?" "I do." "Do you believe that I'm the man from Rue Popincourt?" "Yes." This time there was quite a long silence. Then the voice asked shyly, anxiously, "Are you still there?" "Yes, I'm listening." "Have you already been given the letter that I sent to the newspaper?" "No, it was read out to me on the phone." "Did you receive the cutting with the photograph?" "Yes." "Do you believe me? You don't think I'm a lunatic?" "I've already told you." "What do you think of me?" "First of all, I know that you have no criminal record. Because of my prints." "Exactly. You're used to leading a modest and regular life." "How can you tell?" Maigret fell silent, and the other man began to panic again. "Don't hang up." "Do you have lots of things to tell me?" "I don't know. Perhaps I have no one to talk to." "You aren't married, are you?" "Number." "You live alone. Today, you've taken the day off, perhaps calling your office to tell them you were ill." "You're trying to make me say things that will help you identify me. Are you sure that your technicians aren't trying to trace my call?" "I give you my word." "So you're not in a hurry to arrest me?" "I'm like you. I'm glad it's over." "How do you know?" "You wrote to the papers." "I don't want them to go after an innocent man." "That's not the real reason." "Do you think I want to be caught?" "Unconsciously, yes." "What else do you think about me?" "You feel lost." "The truth is that I'm afraid." "Afraid of what? Of being arrested?" "Number, it doesn't matter. I've already said too much. I wanted to talk to you, to hear your voice. Do you despise me?" "I don't despise anybody. Not even a criminal?" "Not even a criminal?" "You know you'll catch me sooner or later. Isn't that so?" "Yes." "Do you have clues?" Maigret nearly admitted to him, to get it over with, that he already had a photograph of him, first at Quai d'Anjou, then outside the church, and finally at Montparnasse Cemetery. He would only have to publish these photographs in the papers for a number of people to give him the identity of Batile's murderer. If he didn't, It was because he had a hunch that in that case the man wouldn't wait to be arrested, and that they would probably find a corpse at his home. He had to come forward of his own accord, slowly. There are still clues, but it's hard to assess their value. I'm about to hang up. What are you going to do today? What do you mean? It's Saturday. Are you going to spend Sunday in the country? Of course not. Have you got a car? Number. You work in an office, don't you? That's true. There are tens of thousands of offices in Paris, I can tell you that. Do you have friends? Number. A girlfriend? Number, when I have to, I take what I can get. You know what I mean? I'm sure that tomorrow you'll take advantage of the fact that it's Sunday to write a long letter to the papers. How come you guess everything? Because you aren't the first person this has happened to. And how did it work out for the others? There were different endings. Did some of them kill themselves? He didn't reply, and there was silence at the end of the line again. I don't have a gun, and I know that these days it's almost impossible to get hold of one without a special permit. You're not going to commit suicide. What makes you think that? You wouldn't have called me. Maigret wiped his forehead. This conversation seemed almost banal, yet these trivial exchanges were still allowing him to get the man's character in focus. I'm going to hang up, said the voice at the end of the line. You can call me again on Monday. Not tomorrow. It's Sunday tomorrow, and I won't be in the office. Won't you be at home? I'm planning to go to the country with my wife. Each phrase was deliberate. You're lucky. Yes. Are you a happy man? Relatively, like most men. I've never been happy. He hung up abruptly. Either someone had tried to get into the booth, impatient at seeing him talking for such a long time, or the conversation had left his nerves raw. He wasn't a drinker. Perhaps to give himself courage he would make an exception. He had called from a cafe or a bar. People were rubbing shoulders with him, looking at him without suspecting that he was a killer. Maigret called his wife. What would you say to spending the weekend in Meung-sur-Loire? She was so startled that she said nothing for a moment. But what about your investigation? It needs to stew. When would we leave? After lunch. By car? Of course. Even though she had been driving for a year, she still wasn't confident, and she always took the wheel with uncontrollable apprehension. Buy something for dinner this evening, because the shops may be closed by the time we get there, and something to make a large breakfast with tomorrow morning. We'll have lunch at the inn. Among his closest colleagues, the only one available was good old Janvier, and he invited him to go for a drink. What are you doing tomorrow? You know, Chief. Sunday is the day for my mother-in-law, the children's uncles and aunts. We're going to Meung. He and his wife had lunch quickly at Boulevard Richard Lenoir. Then, after doing the washing up, Madame Maigret went and changed. Is it cold? Chilly. Can I wear my floral dress? Why not? You're taking a coat, aren't you? An hour later, they entered the flow of tens of thousands of Parisians heading for a patch of green. They found the house as clean and tidy as if they had left it the previous day, because a local woman came in twice a week to air it, dust it, and clean the parquet floor. There was no point talking to her about new cleaning products. Everything was waxed, even the furniture, and there was a strong smell of polish. Her husband looked after the garden, and Maigret found crocuses in the lawn and, at the foot of the back wall, in the most sheltered spot, daffodils and tulips. His first concern was to go to the first floor to put on an old pair of trousers and a flannel shirt. He always felt that the house, with its exposed beams and dark corners, and the peace that reigned there, was like a priest's house. He wasn't unhappy with this, quite the contrary. Madame Maigret busied herself in the kitchen. Are you very hungry? Normally hungry. They didn't have a television down here. After dinner, when the weather was a little warmer, they sat in the garden and watched twilight fall and darken the landscape. That evening they went for a gentle walk, going down to the Loire, which, after the rains earlier that week, rolled with muddy water and swept tree branches along. Are you worried? He had been silent for a long time. Not exactly. Antoine Batile's killer called me this morning. To taunt you, out of defiance. He needed reassurance. And he turned to you. There was no one else available to him. Are you sure he was the murderer? I said the killer. A murder assumes premeditation. His act wasn't premeditated. Not exactly, unless I'm mistaken. Why did he write to the papers? Did you read that? Yes. At first I thought it was a prank. Do you know who he is? No, but I could find out in 24 hours. Aren't you interested in arresting him? He'll give himself up of his own accord. And what if he doesn't give himself up? If he commits another crime? I don't think that. But Maigret was in a state of suspense. Was he right to be so sure of himself? He thought of Antoine Batille, who had dreamed of studying tropical people and who wanted to marry young Morissette. He wasn't yet 21, and he had been brought down in a deluge in Rue Popincourt, never to get back to his feet. He slept badly. Twice he opened his eyes, thinking that he heard the phone ringing. He won't kill again. He tried to reassure himself. Basically, he's the one who's frightened. A real Sunday sun, a sun of childhood memories. Beneath the dew, the garden smelled good, and the house smelled of eggs and ham. The day passed uneventfully. Still, Maigret's face seemed to be behind a veil. He couldn't relax completely, and his wife was aware of it. At the inn, they were welcomed with open arms, and they had to clink glasses with everyone because they were almost considered as locals. A game of cards this afternoon? Why not? They ate local rillettes made locally, coco vin blanc and, after goat's cheese, rum babas. About 4 o'clock? Of course. He looked for the most sheltered corner of the garden to set down his wicker armchair, and with the sun warming his eyelids, he soon fell asleep. When he woke up, Madame Maigret made him a cup of coffee. It was a pleasure to see you sleeping so well. He had something like a taste of the countryside in his mouth, and he thought he could still hear the flies buzzing around him. Wasn't it strange to hear his voice on the telephone? Neither of them could help thinking about it, each in their own way. After 40 years in the job, I'm still impressed when I encounter a man who was killed. Why? Because he has crossed the line. He didn't provide any further information. He knew what he meant. A man who kills cuts himself off in a sense from the human community. In the blink of an eye, he stops being an individual like the rest. He wanted to explain himself, to say that. He had the words on the tip of his tongue, but he knew that it was no use. No one would understand him. Even real killers, professionals. Their manner is aggressive, sarcastic. It's because they need to show off, to make themselves believe that they still exist as men. Will you be getting back very late? I hope to be back before 6:30. He met up with his old friends from the town, sound people for whom he wasn't the famous Detective Chief Inspector Maigret, but a neighbor, and also an excellent fisherman. The red mat was spread out in front of them. The cards, which had seen better days, were slightly sticky. The local white wine was cool and fresh. Your call. Diamonds. His opponent on the left announced a sequence of 3, his partner 4 queens. Trumps. The afternoon was spent playing cards, fanning them out, announcing runs of 3 or royal pairs. It was like a restful hum. From time to time, the landlord came in to take a look at how each of them was playing, and left again with a knowing smile. Sunday must have seemed like a long day to the man who had killed Antoine Batille. Maigret hoped that he hadn't stayed at home. Did he have a small apartment with his own furniture, or did he pay for a room by the month in a modest hotel? It was better for him not to stay within 4 walls, to go outside and lose himself in the crowd, or perhaps go to the cinema. In Rue Popincourt, on Tuesday evening, it was raining so hard that it looked like a cataclysm, and fishing boats had been lost in the Channel and the North Sea. Wasn't that important in its way? And perhaps also in its way, Antoine's jacket, his long hair. Maigret tried not to think about it, to concentrate on the game. So, Inspector, what do you say? I'll pass. The white wine had gone to his head a little. He wasn't used to it anymore. It went down like cool water, and it was only later that you felt the effects. I'll have to be getting back. We'll stop at 500 points, all right? Let's go for 500 points. He lost and paid for the rounds. It looks as if you've been neglecting your game in Paris. A bit rusty, aren't you? A bit? Yes? You'll have to come for a bit longer at Easter. I hope so. It's the best I can hope for. There are criminals who... And there it was. All of a sudden, he was thinking about the phone call again. Good evening, gentlemen. See you next Saturday? Maybe. He wasn't disappointed. He had had the weekend he had decided to have, but he couldn't hope that his worries and responsibilities wouldn't follow him to the country. At what time do you want to leave? As soon as we've had something to eat. What have you got for dinner? Old Bambois came and gave me a tench, and I cooked it in the oven. He went and looked greedily at the swollen skin, a beautiful golden color. They drove slowly because Madame Maigret was even more anxious by night than by day. Maigret turned on the radio and smiled as he listened to the traffic warnings, then the day's news. It was mostly about foreign politics, and Maigret sighed with relief as he noted that there was nothing about the affair in Rue Popincourt. In other words, the murderer had behaved himself. No crime, no suicide, only the kidnapping of a little girl in Bouches-du-Rhône. They still hoped to find her alive. He slept better than the night before, and it was broad daylight when he was woken by a lorry whose exhaust pipe sounded as if it was exploding. His wife was no longer beside him. She had probably just got up, because the bed was still warm, and she was busy making coffee in the kitchen. Leaning on the banisters, Madame Maigret watched her husband going heavily downstairs, a little as if she was watching a child going off to sit a difficult exam. She knew barely any more than the newspapers, but what the newspapers didn't know was how much energy he put into trying to understand, how much he concentrated during certain investigations. It was as if he identified with the people he was hunting and suffered the same torments as they did. He was lucky enough to find an open platform bus, and that way he was able to go on smoking his first pipe of the morning. No sooner had he arrived in his office than Detective Chief Inspector Grosjean called him on the phone. "How's it going, Maigret?" "Very well. And you? Those shady characters?" Contrary to what one might have believed, it was Gouvion, the pathetic lookout, who was most useful to us, and who allowed us to find witnesses for 2 of the burglaries at the Château de l'Épine, near Arpajon, and the other in a villa in Dreux Forest. Gouvion often spent 3 or 4 days on the spot watching comings and goings. Sometimes he went for lunch or a drink nearby. I think he'll crack soon and spill the beans. His wife, who used to be an actress at Châtelet, is begging him to do it. All 4 of them are at the Santé in different cells. I wanted to keep you up to date and say thank you again. What about your case? It's going very slowly. Half an hour later, as he expected, it was the editor of the morning newspaper wanting to speak to him. Another message? Yes, except that this one didn't come by post, but was put in our letterbox. Is it long? Quite long. The envelope says, "To be given to the author of Saturday's article about the crime in Rue Popincourt." In block letters again? He seems to write very fluently like that. Shall I read it to you? If you would be so kind. Dear Sir, I have read your most recent articles, in particular the one on Saturday, and while I cannot judge their literary value, I have a sense that you are really seeking the truth. The same cannot be said of some of your colleagues, who seek sensations, print anything at all, and then contradict themselves the next day. But I have one reproach to make to you. In the course of your last article, you speak of the lunatic in Rue Popincourt. Why that word, which is insulting, first of all, and which also implies a judgment? Because there were 7 knife blows? Probably because you say later on that the murderer struck like a madman. Do you know that with words of this kind you can do a lot of harm? Some situations are painful enough in themselves without being judged superficially. It reminds me of that Minister of the Interior not so long ago, talking about a 15-year-old boy and using the word monster, which of course the whole of the press picked up. I don't ask to be treated with kid gloves. I know that people only see me as a killer, but I would like not to be troubled in addition by words that probably exceed the thoughts of those who use them. Otherwise, Thank you for your objectivity. I can tell you that I have telephoned Detective Chief Inspector MAIGRET. He seemed understanding, and one is inclined to confide in him. But to what extent does his job not oblige him to play a part, if not to set traps? I think I will phone him again. I feel very tired. Tomorrow, however, I'm going to go back to work at the office. I'm an ordinary paper pusher. On Saturday, I attended Antoine Batil's funeral. I saw his father, his mother, and his sister. I would like them to know that I had no complaints about their son. I didn't know him. I had never seen him. I am sincerely repentant about the harm I have done them. Yours sincerely. Shall I publish it? I don't see any reason not to. On the contrary, it will encourage him to write again, and in each letter we learn a bit more. When you've been able to photocopy the letter, please be so kind as to send it to me. You don't need to have it brought by messenger. The phone call didn't come until 12:30, when MAIGRET wondered whether he should go for lunch. I suppose you're calling me from a cafe or a bar near your office? That's right. Are you in a hurry? I was about to leave for lunch. Didn't you know that I was going to call you? I did. Have you read my letter? I suspected that they would phone you. That's why I didn't send you a copy. You need the public to read your words, don't you? I'd like them not to get the wrong idea. Because a person has killed, people get the wrong idea about him. You do too, probably. You know, I've seen a lot of them. I know. In the days of forced labor, some people used to write to me from Guyana. Others, once their sentence is over, sometimes come and see me. Really? Do you feel a bit better? I don't know. In any case, this morning I was able to work more or less normally. It's strange to think that these same people who treat me quite naturally would become completely different if I just uttered one little phrase. Do you want to utter it? There are times when I have to restrain myself. With my office manager, for example, who looks down on me. Were you born in Paris? In a small provincial town. I won't tell you which one, because it would help you to identify me. What did your father do? He's head accountant in a, let's say, quite an important company. Their right-hand man, you understand. The idiot that the bosses can keep there until 10 o'clock at night and make him come in on Saturday afternoon, if not Sunday. And your mother? She's in poor health. As far back as I go in my memories, I always see her ill. Apparently it started after I was born. Do you have any brothers or sisters? Number for that very reason. She still keeps the house, which is very clean. When I went to school, I was one of the best turned out among the pupils, too. My parents are proud people. They would have liked me to become a lawyer or a doctor. I'd had enough of studying. Then they thought I would go into the company that my father works for, which is the biggest company in the town. I didn't want to stay there. I felt I was suffocating. I came to Paris. Where you're suffocating in an office, aren't you? Except that as soon as I leave, no one knows me. I'm free. He was talking more easily, more naturally than the last time. He was less frightened. There were fewer silences. What do you think of me? Didn't you ask me that already? I'm talking about me in general, disregarding Rue Popincourt. I think there are tens, hundreds of thousands of people in a similar situation. Most of them are married and have children. Why aren't you married? Because of your condition? Do you really mean what you're saying? Yes. Every word? Yes. I don't understand you. You aren't how I imagined a detective chief inspector with the police judiciaire would be. It's the same with everybody. Even at Quai des Orfèvres, we're all different from each other. What I really don't understand is what you told me last time. You claimed you'd be able to identify me within 24 hours. It's true. How? I'll tell you when we're face to face. What reason do you have not to get on with it and arrest me straight away? And what if I asked you what your reason was for killing? There was a silence even more troubling than the others, and MAIGRET wondered if he had gone too far. Hello, he said. Yes. I'm sorry for being harsh. You must face the facts. I know. That's what I'm trying to do, believe me. Perhaps you imagine that I write for the papers, and I'm calling you because I need to talk about me. Basically, it's because it's all so wrong. What's wrong? What people think. The questions I'll be asked by the court if I'm ever brought to trial, the summing up by the assistant public prosecutor, and even, perhaps especially, the plea by my lawyer. Are you already thinking that far ahead? You have to. Are you planning on handing yourself in? You think I'll be doing that soon, don't you? Yes. Do you think I'll be relieved? I'm sure of it. I'll be locked up in a cell and treated like... He didn't finish his sentence, and Maigret avoided intervening. I don't want to keep you longer. Your wife will be waiting for you. I'm sure she won't be getting impatient. She's used to it. Silence again. It was as if he couldn't bring himself to break the line that connected him to another man. Are you happy? He asked shyly, as if obsessed by the question. Relatively happy. That is to say, as happy as a man can be. I've never been happy since the age of 14, not for a day, an hour, a minute. He abruptly changed his tone. Thank you. And he hung up. In the afternoon, Maigret had to go up to Poiret's office. How is your investigation coming along? He asked, with the hint of impatience common to all examining magistrates. It's practically over. Does that mean you know the murderer? He called me again this morning. Who is it? Maigret took from his pocket the enlarged photograph of a face taken in the crowd, in the sun on Quai d'Anjou. Is it this young man? He's not all that young. He's about 30. Have you arrested him? Not yet. Where does he live? I don't know his name or his address. If I published this photograph, people who see him every day, his colleagues, his concierge, whoever, would recognize him and immediately tell me. Why don't you? That's the question that's troubling him too, and which he asked me for the second time this morning. Had he called you already? On Saturday, yes. You realize, Inspector, the responsibility that you're assuming. And in any case, it's a responsibility that I share indirectly now that I've seen this photograph. I don't like that. Neither do I. Except if I went too quickly, he probably wouldn't allow himself to be arrested, and would prefer to end it all. Are you afraid that he'll kill himself? He hasn't much to lose, don't you think? Hundreds of criminals have been apprehended, and very few have taken their own lives. What if he was of that type? Has he written to the papers yet? A letter was deposited in a newspaper's letterbox yesterday evening or last night. I think that mania is well known. If I remember my criminology courses correctly, it's usually the preserve of the paranoid. According to psychiatrists, yes? You don't agree with them? I don't know enough to contradict them. The only difference between them and me is that I don't divide people into categories. But it's necessary. Necessary why? To judge them, for example. It's not my role to judge. I was told that you'd be hard to handle. The magistrate said that with a faint smile, but he still meant it. Shall we do a deal? It's Monday. Let's say Wednesday at the same time. I'm listening. If your man isn't behind bars, you'll send his photograph to the papers. You really want me to do that? I'm giving you as much time as I think is necessary. Thank you. Maigret went back down to his floor and opened the door to the inspector's office. He didn't need them especially. Are you coming, Janvier? In his office, he went over to the window and opened it because he was hot, and the noise from outside suddenly filled the room. He sat down at his desk and chose a pipe with a curved stem that he smoked less often than the others. No news? No news, Chief. Sit down. The magistrate hadn't understood. For him, criminals were defined by one article or another of the penal code. Maigret also sometimes needed to think out loud. He called me again. Has he decided to hand himself in? He wants to. He's still hesitating, the way one hesitates to jump into icy water. I suppose he trusts you. I think so, but he knows it's not down to me. I'm just back from upstairs. When the examining magistrate starts questioning him, unfortunately he'll grasp certain realities. I know a bit more about him. He comes from a small provincial town and preferred not to tell me which one. That means it's a very small town, where we would easily have been able to pick up his trail. His father is a head accountant, a right-hand man, as he says, not without bitterness. I know the type. They wanted him to be a lawyer or a doctor. He couldn't complete his studies, and he didn't want to go into the same company as his father either. That's not uncommon, as I told him. He's an office clerk. He lives alone. He has a reason for not getting married. Did he tell you what? No, but I think I understand. But Maigret avoided saying anything more on the subject. There's nothing I can do but wait. He will probably remind me tomorrow. On Wednesday afternoon, I will have to send his photograph to the newspapers. Why? An ultimatum from the examining magistrate. He doesn't want to assume the responsibility of waiting for longer than that. Do you hope that... The phone rang. It's your anonymous caller, Inspector. Hello. Monsieur Maigret. Forgive me for hanging up on you this morning. There are moments when I say to myself that nothing makes any sense. I'm like a fly bumping into a window as it tries to escape the four walls of the room. You're not in the office? I went in. I did so in good faith. They gave me an urgent file. When I opened it and read the first few lines, I asked myself what I was doing there. I was seized by a sort of panic, and on the pretext of going to the toilet, I went out into the corridor. I paused just long enough to grab my raincoat and hat in passing. I was worried that I was going to be caught, as if I felt I was being hunted down. At the start of the call, Maigret had gestured to Janvier to pick up the second receiver. What part of town are you in? On the Grands Boulevards. I've been walking in the crowd for over an hour. There are times when I'm angry with you, when I suspect you of doing it on purpose to drive me mad, to put me gradually in such a state of mind that I will have no option left but to hand myself in. Have you been drinking? How can you tell? His voice grew more vehement. I've had 2 or 3 brandies. Are you not in the habit of drinking? Just a glass of wine with meals, the occasional aperitif. Do you smoke? Number. What are you going to do now? I don't know. Nothing. Walk. Perhaps go and sit in a cafe to read the afternoon papers. Have you sent any other messages? Number, I might write one, but I haven't got much left to say. Do you live in a furnished apartment? I own my own furniture and have access to a kitchenette and a bathroom. Do you prepare your own meals? I used to prepare my evening meal. And you haven't done that for a few days? That's right. I go home as late as possible. Why are you asking me such banal questions? Because they help me to understand you. Do you do the same thing with all your clients? It varies from case to case. Are they so different from each other? All men are different. Why don't you come and see me? He giggled nervously. Would you let me go again? I can't promise to do that. You see, when I go and see you, as you say, that's when I will have made a definite decision. Maigret nearly talked to him about the examining magistrate's ultimatum. Then he weighed the pros and cons and decided to keep quiet. Goodbye, Inspector. Goodbye. Good luck. Maigret and Janvier looked at one another. Poor guy, Janvier murmured. He's still struggling with himself. He's lucid. He's not deluding himself. I wonder if he'll come before Wednesday. Don't you have a sense that he's already hesitating? He's been hesitating since Saturday. But now he's outside, in the sunlight, in the crowd where no one is pointing at him. He can go into a cafe and order a brandy, and they'll serve him without paying him any attention. He can go for dinner in a restaurant or sit in the darkness of a cinema. I understand. I'm putting myself in his place at any moment. If he committed suicide, as you fear, it would be even more final. I know, but he's the one who should know that. I only hope he won't go on drinking. A draught of fresh air passed through the room, and Maigret looked at the open window. In fact, why don't we go for a drink? And, a few minutes later, they were both standing at the bar of the Brasserie Dauphine. A cognac, Maigret ordered, while Janvier smiled. Chapter 7. Tuesday was difficult, but Maigret was in very good spirits when he reached his office. It was such a fine spring day that he had walked the whole way from Boulevard Richard Lenoir sniffing the air, the smell of the shops, sometimes turning to look at the bright, cheerful dresses of the women. Nothing for me. It was 9 o'clock. Nothing, Chief? In a few minutes, in half an hour, one of the editors or editors-in-chief would call him to announce a new letter written in block letters. He was counting on a decisive day. He had prepared for it and arranged his pipes on his desk, carefully chose one, and went and lit it by the window while looking at the Seine sparkling in the morning sun. When he had to attend the morning briefing, he had Janvier go and sit in his office. If he phones, make him wait and come and get me straight away. Yes, Chief. There was no phone call while he was in the commissioner's office. There wasn't one at 10 o'clock. There still hadn't been one by 11. Maigret went through some mail, absent-mindedly filled in forms, and sometimes, as if to cheat time, went and spent a few minutes in the inspector's office, taking care to leave his door open. Everyone felt worried, nervous. This telephone that wasn't ringing created a sort of void that made him uneasy. Something was missing. Are you sure that there wasn't a call for me? He was the one who ended up phoning the papers. Have you had anything this morning? Not this morning, no. The previous day, the first phone call from the man from Rue Popincourt had come in at 12:10. At midday, Maigret didn't go out with the others. He waited until past, and once again asked Janvier, who knew most about the case, to take his place. His wife didn't ask any questions. The answer was all too obvious. Had he lost the game? Had he been wrong to trust his instinct? Tomorrow, at the same time, he would be obliged to go and see the examining magistrate and admit defeat. The photograph would be published in the papers. What the hell could that idiot be doing? Rage surged through him in waves. He was only trying to make himself interesting, and now he's dropping me. Maybe he was making fun of how trusting I am. He went back to the office sooner than usual. Nothing? He asked Janvier automatically. Janvier would have given a lot to have good news to give him, because it was difficult to see his boss in this state. Not yet. The afternoon was even longer than the morning. Maigret tried in vain to take an interest in routine work, making the most of the opportunity to get through overdue paperwork. But his mind was elsewhere. He imagined all the possible hypotheses and rejected them one by one. He even telephoned the police emergency number. Has anyone called you about suicides? Just one moment. There was one during the night, an old woman who gassed herself at Porte d'Orléans. A man threw himself into the Seine at 8 o'clock this morning. We were able to save him. What age? 42. Neurasthenic. Why was he so bothered? He had done what he could. It was time to face up to reality. He wasn't unhappy because he had been deceived, but because his intuition had failed him. Because then it was serious. It meant that he had lost touch, and in that case, damn, damn, and damn. He had said that at the top of his voice in the solitude of his office, and he picked up his hat and went, without an overcoat, all alone, towards the Brasserie Dauphine, where he drank 2 large beers at the bar, one after the other. No phone call? He asked as he came back. By 7 o'clock there had been no call, and he resigned himself to going home. He felt cumbersome, and not at peace with himself. He took a taxi. He didn't enjoy the sun or the colourful bustle of the streets. He didn't even know what the weather was like. He began heavily climbing the stairs and stopped twice because he was slightly out of breath. A few steps away from his landing, he saw his wife, who was watching him come up. She was waiting for him the way one waits for a child coming home from school, and he was about to get cross with her. When he was level with her, she merely said to him in an undertone, "He's here." "Are you sure it's him?" "He told me so himself." "Has he been here for a long time?" "Nearly an hour." "Aren't you frightened?" Maigret suddenly felt retrospectively afraid for his wife. "I knew I wasn't in any danger." They whispered outside the door, which was ajar. "We'd been chatting." "About what?" "About everything. Spring, Paris, the little restaurants popular with taxi drivers that are disappearing." Maigret came in at last, and in the living room, which served as both a dining room and a drawing room, he saw a man, still young, rising to his feet. Madame Maigret had invited him to take off his raincoat, and he had set his hat down on a chair. He was wearing a navy blue suit and looked younger than he was. He forced a smile. "Forgive me for coming here," he said. "Up at your office, I was afraid that they wouldn't let me see you straight away. People tell so many stories." He must have been afraid of being beaten up. He was embarrassed and tried to find words to break the silence. He didn't realize that the inspector was as embarrassed as he was. Meanwhile, Madame Maigret had gone back into the kitchen. "You're just as I imagined you would be. Take a seat. Your wife has been very patient with me." And as if he had forgotten to do it until then, he took a Swedish knife from his pocket and held it out to Maigret. "You'll be able to have the blood analyzed. I haven't cleaned it." Maigret set it down casually on a pedestal table and sat down in an armchair facing his visitor. "I don't know where to start. It's very difficult. First of all, I'm going to ask you some questions. What's your name?" "Robert Bureau. Bureau like an office. You could say it's symbolic, because my father and I—" "Where do you live?" "I have a small lodging in Rue de l'École de Médecine, in a very old building at the end of the courtyard. I work in Rue Lafitte for an insurance company. Or rather, I did work. It's all over, isn't it?" He uttered the phrase with melancholy resignation. He was serene and looked at his calm surroundings as if trying to become a part of them. "What town do you come from originally?" "Saint-Amand-Montrond, on the banks of the Cher. There's a big printworks there, the Maman and Delvoye printworks, which does work for several Paris publishers. My father is a clerk there, and on his lips the names of Maman and Delvoye are nearly sacred. We lived, my parents still do, in a small house near Canal de Berry." Maigret didn't want to rush him and get to the essential questions too quickly. "You didn't like your town?" "Number. Why not? I felt as if I was suffocating there. Everyone knows everybody. When you walk down the street, you see curtains twitching in the windows. I've always heard my parents murmuring, 'What would people say? Were you a good student?' Until the age of 14.5, I was top of the class. My parents got so used to it that they told me off if I came down a mark in my report." "When did you begin to get frightened?" Maigret had the impression that his interlocutor was becoming paler, that two little hollows formed near his nostrils, and that his lips were growing dry. "I don't know how I've been able to keep the secret until now." "What happened when you were 14.5? Do you know the area?" "I passed through it." "The Cher runs parallel to the canal. In places it's only about 10 meters away. It's broad and shallow, with stones and rocks that mean it can be forded. The banks are covered with reeds, willows, and all kinds of shrubs, especially towards Drevant, a village about 3 kilometers from Saint-Amand. That's where the local children go and play. I didn't play with them." "Why not?" "My mother called them little hooligans. Some of them swam stark naked in the river. Almost all of them were the sons of print workers, and my parents made a big distinction between the workers and the office clerks. There were about 15, maybe 20 of them playing. There were 2 girls with them. One of them, Renee, who must have been 13, was very shapely for her age, and I was in love with her." "I've thought of all that a lot, Inspector, and I wonder if things might have happened differently. I suppose they might. I'm not trying to make excuses for myself. One boy, the butcher's son, kissed her in the bushes. I caught them. They went and swam with the others. The boy was called Raymond Pommel, and he had red hair like his father from whom we bought our sausages. At one point he had gone off to relieve himself. He had come close to me without knowing, and I took my knife out of my pocket and flicked out the blade. I swear I didn't know what I was doing. I stabbed him several times with the sensation of freeing myself of something. For me, at that moment, it was indispensable. I wasn't committing a crime, killing a boy. I stabbed. I went on stabbing when he was on the ground. Then I walked calmly away. He had grown animated and his eyes were gleaming. They only discovered him 2 hours later. They hadn't noticed that he was no longer with the gang of 20 or so kids. I went home after washing the knife in the canal." "How did you have that knife at such a young age?" I had stolen it a few months earlier from one of my uncles. I was wild about penknives. One Sunday at my uncle's, I noticed that Swedish knife and took it. My uncle looked for it everywhere without thinking of me for a moment. How did your mother not find it, for example? The wall of our house, facing the garden, was covered with Virginia creeper, and its dark foliage framed my window. When I didn't have my knife in my pocket, I hid it in the thickest part of the vine. No one thought of you. That's what surprised me. They arrested a sailor whom they then had to release. They thought of every possible suspect except a child. What was your state of mind? To tell you the truth, I felt no remorse. I listened to what the women said in the street. I read the newspaper from Montluçon which talked about the crime, without feeling concerned. I felt no emotion as I watched the funeral passing by. For me, at that moment, it was already part of the past, part of the inevitable. I had nothing to do with it. I don't know if you understand. I think it's impossible, if you haven't been through it. I continued going to school, where I had become distracted, and my marks showed as much. Apparently I was rather pale, and my mother took me to our doctor, who gave me a cursory examination. It's his age, Madame Bureau. This boy is a bit anemic. I think I felt I wasn't entirely in the real world. I wanted to get away. Not to get away from possible punishment, but get away from my parents, the town. Go very far away, anywhere at all. Are you thirsty? Maigret asked. He was thirsty himself. He poured 2 cognacs with water and held one out to his visitor, who drank greedily, emptying his glass in a breath. When did you become aware of what was happening to you? You believe me, don't you? I believe you. I've always been convinced that no one would believe me. It happened bit by bit. As time passed, I felt more different from everyone else. Stroking my knife in my pocket, I said to myself, I've killed somebody. No one knows. I almost wanted to tell them, to tell my fellow pupils, my teachers, my parents, the way you boast of an exploit. Then, one day, I caught myself following a girl along the canal. She was the daughter of some bargees going back to her boat. It was winter, and night had already fallen. I said to myself that I would only have to take a few quick steps and take my knife out of my pocket. All of a sudden, I started shaking. I turned around without thinking and ran back to the first houses in the town, as if I would feel safer there. Has that happened to you often since then? Since I was a child. At any time. About 20 times. In most cases, I didn't have a particular victim in mind. I would be outside and suddenly I would think, I'll kill him. I found myself murmuring those words under my breath. They weren't directed at anyone in particular. It was just anyone. I'll kill him. I remembered later that when I was a child, when my father smacked me and sent me to my room to punish me, I would mutter the same thing. I'll kill him. I don't suppose I could have another glass. Maigret poured him one and poured one for himself at the same time. What age were you when you left Saint-Amand? 17. I knew I wouldn't pass my school leaving exam. My father didn't understand and watched me uneasily. He wanted to make me join the print works. One night I left without a word, taking a suitcase and my modest savings. And your knife? Yes. 100 times I tried to get rid of it, but couldn't bring myself to do it. I don't know why. You see, he tried to find the right words. He clearly wanted to be as truthful and precise as possible, and it was difficult for him. In Paris, at first I was hungry, and I ended up, like many others, unloading vegetables at Les Halles. I read the classifieds and sometimes hurried to wherever there was a job to be had. That's how I ended up working for the insurance company. Did you have any steady relationships? Number. Every now and again I would settle for picking up a woman in the street. One of them tried to take a banknote from my wallet, and I nearly took out my knife. My forehead was sweating. I tottered away. I realized that I couldn't get married. Did you try? Have you lived alone in Paris without parents, without friends, and come back to your lodgings all alone in the evening? Yes. Then you must understand. I didn't want friends either, because I couldn't be honest with them without risking prison for the rest of my days. I went to the Sainte Geneviève Library. I devoured psychiatric treatises, always hoping to discover an explanation. I probably lacked knowledge of the basics. When I thought that my case corresponded to a particular mental illness, I realized that I didn't have this symptom or that. I became more and more anxious. I'll kill him. In the end, I looked out for those words on my lips, and then I would run home, shut myself away, and throw myself on my bed. Apparently, I groaned. One evening, a neighbor, a middle-aged man, came and knocked at my door. I automatically took my knife out of my pocket. "What is it?" I asked through the door. "Is everything all right? Are you ill? I thought I heard groaning. I'm sorry." He went away. Chapter 8. Madame Maigret appeared in the doorway and gave him a sign which he didn't understand. So far removed was it from this atmosphere. Then she murmured, "Would you come here for a moment?" In the kitchen she whispered, "Dinner's ready. It's after 8. What shall we do?" "What do you mean?" "We need to eat." "It isn't over." "Perhaps he could eat with us." He looked at her, dumbfounded. For a moment, her suggestion even struck him as quite natural. "Number, we don't need a laid table, a family dinner. It would make him horribly uncomfortable. Do you have any cold meat or cheese?" "Yes." "In that case, make some sandwiches and serve them with a bottle of white wine." "How is he?" "Calmer and more lucid than I feared. I'm beginning to understand why he didn't get in touch all day. He needed to take a step back." "From what?" "From himself, did you hear? At 14.5, he killed a boy." When Maigret came back into the living room, Robert Bureau, embarrassed, murmured, "I'm keeping you from your dinner, aren't I?" "If we were at Quai des Orfèvres, I'd have sandwiches and beer sent up. There's no reason not to do the same thing here. My wife is making us sandwiches, and she will serve them with a bottle of white wine." "If I'd known—" "If you'd known what?" "That someone might understand me. You're probably an exception. The examining magistrate won't have the same attitude, and neither will the jury. I've spent my life being afraid of striking again without intending to. I watched myself all the time, in a sense, wondering if I wasn't about to have an attack. At the slightest headache, for example. I've seen I don't know how many doctors. I didn't admit the truth to them, of course, but I complained of violent headaches accompanied by a cold sweat. Most of them didn't take it seriously and prescribed aspirin. A neurologist in Boulevard Saint-Germain gave me an electroencephalogram. According to him, there's nothing wrong with my brain." "Was that recently?" 2 years ago. I almost wanted to whisper to him that I wasn't normal, that I'm sick, since he couldn't work it out by himself. Sometimes when I passed by a police station, I wanted to go in and say, "I killed a kid when I was 14. I feel I risk killing again. It needs to be cured. Lock me up. Have me looked after." "Why didn't you?" "Because I read the crime pages. At almost every trial, psychiatrists give statements, and often people make fun of them. When they talk about diminished responsibility or mental illness, the jury doesn't take it into account. At best, it reduces the sentence to 15 or 20 years. I tried to muddle through on my own to feel the attacks coming, to run and lock myself away at home. That worked for a long time." Madame Maigret brought them a tray of sandwiches, a bottle of Pouilly Fuissé, and 2 glasses. "Bon appétit." She withdrew discreetly to go and eat alone in the kitchen. "Help yourself." The wine was cold and dry. "I don't know if I'm hungry. There are days when I barely touch food, others, on the contrary, when I feel terrible hunger. That may be a sign as well. I look for signs everywhere. I analyze all my responses. I attach importance to my slightest thoughts. Try to put yourself in my place. At any moment I could—" He bit into his sandwich, and was the first to be surprised to find himself eating normally. "And to think I was afraid of being wrong about you. I had read in the papers that you were humane, and that sometimes brought you into conflict with the public prosecutor's office. On the other hand, they also talked about how you make people talk during interrogations. You treat the accused gently and cordially to win his trust, and he doesn't realize that you're gradually drawing the truth out of him." Maigret couldn't help smiling. "Not all cases are the same. When I called you, I weighed each of your words, each of your silences. You finally came forward. I no longer had any choice. I felt that everything was collapsing. Wait, let me confess something to you. Yesterday, at one point, on the grand boulevards, the idea came to me of attacking some random person in the midst of the crowd to strike out around me wildly in the hope of getting myself shot down. Can I pour myself some more? He added with slightly sad resignation, I won't be able to drink anything like this for the rest of my days. For a moment, Maigret tried to imagine what Poiret's face would have been like if he had been able to witness this exchange. Bureau went on. There were 3 days of torrential rain. People often talk about the moon in relation to people like me. I have observed myself. I haven't noticed my impulses being more frequent or stronger when the moon is full. Instead, what counts is a certain intensity. In July, when it's very hot, for example. In winter, when big snowflakes fall. It's as if nature is going through a crisis and... Do you understand? That incessant rain, the squalls, the noise of the wind shaking the shutters of my bedroom, it all put my nerves on edge. In the evening, I left my lodgings and started walking through the storm. After a few minutes, I was drenched, and I deliberately lifted my head to receive the sheets of water fully in my face. I didn't hear the signal, or if I did, I didn't obey. I should have gone home rather than carrying on. I didn't look where I was going. I walked and walked. Eventually, my hand gripped the knife in my pocket. I saw the lights of a little bar in quite a dark street. I heard footsteps in the distance, but they didn't worry me. A young man in a light-colored jacket came out, with his long hair plastered to the back of his neck, and something clicked. I didn't know him. I'd never seen him before. I couldn't see his face. I stabbed him several times. Then, as I left the scene, I realized that the relief hadn't come, and I retraced my steps to stab him again and lift his head. That's why they talked about a frenzied attacker. They also talked about a madman. He fell silent and looked around him, as if surprised by the setting in which he found himself. I'm definitely mad, aren't I? There's no way I'm not sick. If someone could cure me, that's been my hope for so long. But you'll see, they'll just settle for sending me to jail for the rest of my days. Maigret didn't dare to reply. You're not saying anything? I'd like you to receive treatment. You don't really expect it to happen, do you? Maigret drained his glass. Drink up. In a little while we'll go to Quai des Orfèvres. Thank you for listening to me. He emptied his glass in one, and Maigret topped it up. Bureau hadn't been wrong about much. At the Court of Assizes, 2 psychiatrists came and declared that the accused was not insane in the legal sense of the word, but that his responsibility was largely diminished because he found it difficult to resist his impulses. The lawyer begged the jury to send his client to a psychiatric hospital where he could be kept under surveillance. The jury accepted the attenuating circumstances, but still sentenced Robert Bureau to 15 years' imprisonment. After which the judge cleared his throat and said, We realize that this verdict does not correspond completely to reality. At present, alas, we have no establishments where a man like Bureau could be treated effectively while remaining under strict surveillance. In the dock, Bureau looked around for Maigret and gave him a resigned smile. He seemed to say, I predicted this, didn't I? When Maigret left, his shoulders were a little heavier than before. This concludes the detective novel. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe or leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.